Kirk is on that ice planet, and we see this old man with a torch come in waving off this. I don't think we ever got a name for that beast that was coming after him, but he wards it off. And I knew before he turned around who it was. And I think I started like gripping my wife's wrist. My mom's like, it's him, it's him, it's him. And I think that's where she really fell in love with my love of Star Trek, just because she could see the way I reacted.
Trek Profiles Podcast, episode 71, recorded August 2022. This is the Trek Profiles Podcast, where each episode we talk with a Star Trek fan, and we talk about why this show matters to them so much. I'm John, your intrepid host of this whole enterprise, and I welcome you to this, the Trek Profiles Podcast, episode 71. If you wish to get in touch with us, you can reach us at feedback@trekprofiles.com or on Facebook or Twitter @TrekProfiles. Spoiler warning, this episode may contain spoilers for any Trek content up to and including Season 3 of Lower Decks. You have been warned, humans. As always, my trusty sidekick and co-host is the fervently fresh, furiously formal, yet never fashionable M5 Multitronic unit. Say hi, M5.
M5 is ready.
Let's have the announcements.
Announcements on screen.
The Trek Profiles Podcast is an independent show. If you'd like to support us, the best way you can do that is just to follow us wherever you're getting your audio. We're on all the major platforms, and your following us helps other Trek fans find us. Another way you can show your support is to make a donation in any amount to our official charity here at the show. That's the Children's Fund for Glycogen Storage Disease. A donation in any amount helps, as they are doing some research to cure this terrible genetic condition. I talked about why we selected this and what this charity means to me in episode 34 of the show. So if you're able and if you'd like, please head over to trekprofiles.com/donate, and you'll see the link there to give directly to the charity. And I'll also put a link in the show notes too. Thank you so much. There are some lightly edited outtakes and bonus material at the end of this episode. At one point, my guest and I went on a terribly long diversion about the Dune books, Game of Thrones, and the original Star Trek Bible. It was some of the stuff we've covered on the show before. I think I ended up talking way too much, and it didn't really fit the premise of the show all that well. So I cut that, put it in the bonus material. So that, and there's some other bits and bobs back there. It'll come after the ending audio cards. Enjoy them, or not, as you choose. At the end of every episode, my guest faces the Kobayashi Maru lightning round. They get 5 terrible multiple-choice Star Trek questions, and they must give us their answers. Now, after each episode drops, I tweet those questions out as polls where you can have your say. So let's look at the questions from episode 68 with Chris Lackey and see how it went. Favorite second planet? The choices were Gamma Hydra 2, Jaros 2, Setlik 2, and Viridian 2. Both my guest and the Twitter people were all for Viridian 2 with a 49% result. Gamma Hydra 2 got 38, Jaros 2 got 13, and 0 humans selected Setlik 2. Why are you a Federation criminal? Genome resequencing, Omega particle research, or busting the Warp 5 speed limit? Everyone agreed that genome resequencing was the thing. The poll was 67% along with my guests, 22% for Omega particle research, and the Warp 5 speed limit got 11%. Speed kills. Where are we going after work? Sandrine's Bar, the Paxao Resort Tiki Bar, or Sullivan's Public House? My guest liked the Tiki Bar, but the poll people preferred Sandrine's. The French bar got 50%, Sullivan's Pub was at 40%, and the Tiki Bar came in dead last at 10%. Which Star Trek robot is chasing you? Ruk, Dreadnought, or Norman? Chris picked Ruk, but in a surprising turn of events, Ruk got 0 votes in the Twitter poll. I think that's actually the first time a guest answer got 0 votes. Dreadnought got 38, and topping the list was Norman at 62%. And finally, which of these choices is the best episode title? Trials and Tribulations, Spockamuck, or Moist Vessel? My guest picked Moist Vessel, but in the Twitter poll, it was Trials and Tribulations by 62%, with Moist Vessel getting 23% and Spockamuck at the bottom with 62%. Now, if you enjoyed those questions and would like to take a stab at writing your own for possible inclusion on the show, send them to me at feedback@trekprofiles.com or DM me on Twitter. Every successful entry gets you a credit in the show notes and a shout-out in the episode. Okay, letters and communications. I got an email from regular correspondent Sandy, and she asks me a question that I actually hadn't thought about, which is how long do I intend to do the show? It was something that I had to actually think about if I was going to answer it, but I do think it deserves an answer. So let's take a look at this. First of all, I think I made a good decision at the start of the show to only promise one episode per month. I've exceeded that, but that was the floor. So the demands of day-to-day life haven't impinged too much on my doing the show. In fact, I did a little bit of math. My first episode came out in March 2018, and as I recorded this, that was about 56 months ago, and we're on episode 71. So I've over-delivered, which is great, so that's good. Second, doing the show, still fun, and I love preparing and doing the interviews. And third, people still surprise me about their Star Trek stories and telling me about their interactions with Star Trek. So as long as all three of those things remain true, I will keep going as long as you all listen. So thank you for the question, Sandy. And if any of you have a question or comment or thought that you want to share, feedback@trekprofiles.com is the way to go. Okay, I got a little bit of errata. During this episode, we make mention of a Captain Ahab mashup video with an aircraft carrier in it. So you're going to just have to hear that bit in context for it to make any sense. But anyway, during the show, I promised to put a link up to that video in the show notes, but both my guest and I looked for the video and we could not find it. Alas. That's it for announcements. Let's start the show. M5, hit it.
Commencing transmission.
He loves Data, the Klingons, and that unitary letter Q the most. His favorite ship is the Klingon version of the Bird of Prey. What the what? That's really Romulan, but, I'm not going to dither. And he's from Clarksville, Tennessee, North America, Earth, in Sector 001. It's Matt Schorr. Welcome, Matt, and thanks for being on the podcast.
Oh, hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So, Matt, you are probably the biggest meme lord amongst my Twitter followers, right? And I always enjoy all of your various Twitter memes. I need to know, even before question one, are you going to release a commemorative meme about being recorded for the show when this goes live?
I hadn't thought about it, but now that you've mentioned it, that's the first thing I'm going to get on Photoshop and start working on right away.
All right, fantastic. That sounds good. Well, it's time for question one. Are you a Star Trek fan, Matt?
Oh, absolutely.
When did you decide that you were a Star Trek fan?
I probably made the decision in high school, if I can call it a decision, but I really discovered it as a child. I don't know exactly how old that I was. I know that I was introduced to science fiction through Star Wars, I think as so many children are, especially children that grew up in the 80s like I did. And just over the course of time, I just kind of discovered Star Trek. And I think I was aware of it as the old 60s show, but being as I was 5 or 6 years old, that to me, that was boring, very unfair, but 5 or 6 year old perspective. I want to put that out there. But then I discovered Wrath of Khan on television. That one got aired, and I sat down and I watched that, and it was completely different than that show that I thought Star Trek was this kind of bright light looking, and all of a sudden Khan is dark. You can't narrow corridors, red lighting, everything is really grim and gritty, and that really hooked me. And I just kept exploring it more and more from then, and then went back and started watching some of those older shows that at one time I would have considered boring, and then I realized, you know what, these are actually brilliant stuff. They've got something to say, and it's just, and it really resonates with me on a lot of levels. And then I discovered Next Generation, and that's when I was really hooked, because Generation, that was like my era. So it's always weird to me when they rebooted the series with the old generation. It's like, well, I'm the next generation, but I'm the old one. How does this work? But Star Trek timelines are fun that way.
So where did you grow up?
I grew up in West Kentucky. I currently live, as you mentioned, in Clarksville, Tennessee, but a little bitty town of about 10,000 people, Mayfield, Kentucky. If anybody out there recognizes that name, the only reason is because this giant F4 tornado wiped it off the map at the end of 2021, and they're still rebuilding as we record this. But it's a great place to grow up. Nice little town, good people, really resilient, as this has proven. But about 10 years ago, I relocated to here to where I'm at now, Clarksville, Tennessee. Been here ever since. So I'm a child of two worlds in a sense, kind of like Spock, right?
Right on, right on. And so you were watching Star Trek over the air on some local broadcast channel?
Yes, yeah, because that's and it was either NBC or ABC, one of those big when they used to do those Sunday night at the movies. For those who don't recall, that used to be a big deal when you couldn't just video on demand and watch anything you wanted at any given time. You either had to rent a VCR, which at this particular point in my youth, I'm just old enough to remember when dinosaurs went extinct. But in this time, children, we had these devices called VHS VCR players, and my parents actually would rent them. So like we had the tape deck that would pop up. For anybody here remembers those awful
Oh, a
things,
top loader.
yeah, you had to like
Yeah.
press it down. It's a complete
Yeah,
pain in the butt.
if you had money, you could buy the front loader.
Yeah,
That was the upscale one, but the top loader that was for the plebs.
See, we weren't even plebs. We had to rent our top loader. So, but the top loader, and of course, like I said, television. That was really where I discovered it because I never wanted to rent Star Trek. 'Cause that's again my colored perspective of being a really really wee lad. Finding it uninteresting, but it was on TV and I started watching it and I really got into that one. And then I started watching the movies. Then I went back and started discovering those old shows. Then I discovered Next Generation. And then, when I became a teenager, DS9 started coming out and it's like I kept coming back. And so here we are today.
What's the earliest episode you have a recollection of watching?
Wrath of Khan is the earliest one that I know what it was. There were probably clips and bits and pieces of stuff I'd seen prior to that, but Wrath of Khan, that one I knew. And the other thing to top it all off, it's like I watched it at night, and so in addition to this really moody atmospheric darkness that you have in there,
Mm-hmm.
I'm watching it at night, and I think I was by myself. My parents were watching something in another room. My memory of this was discovering it completely on my own, and this could be why so many people now that I'm adult are still convinced I'm a big Star Wars fan. It's like, well, look, nothing against Star Wars. It's great. I like it, but really, I'm Star Trek, guys. That's my bread and butter. But anyway, yeah, those are my earliest memories of discovering it through that. And then, yeah, Next Generation, same thing. I was by myself watching it. Nobody watched it with me. I was all by my lonesome.
So you watched Next Generation all the way through in original broadcast on regular TV?
The short answer is yes. Now, being a child, I am sure I know for a fact there's a lot that I missed, but I did watch it in succession as much as I could. I saw a lot of the big ones, like, of course, Best of Both Worlds. Then the other two-parter, I can't recall the name of it, but the one where Data and Lore ended up leading the remnants of the Borg. And of course, I did actually see the first airing of All Good Things, the final episode. So that's kind of a cool memory. Like I actually saw that when it aired.
And did you keep up with your viewing as new episodes, new series came out? So you had Deep Space Nine, Voyager, Enterprise?
Yes, and I did it every bit as effectively as I did as a child. So, but I missed patches all over the place, and I've had to go back with streaming and kind of rediscover and fill in gaps that I didn't quite remember along the way, especially with DS9, being as that one was a serialized drama. That boy, there was so much that I missed in that one.
So as we sit here in 2022, have you seen it all?
No, there's a lot that I still haven't seen. Of course, New Trek, I'm always behind because I don't have Paramount Plus, and it's just so convenient to wait for it to hit become a Blu-ray purchase for people because I'm apparently, like so many husbands and fathers, very difficult to buy gifts for. So I just say, okay, buy me Star Trek, that'll work. So, so that helps a lot of people, especially my in-laws, when it comes to buying gifts for me. So I'm way behind on that. And then when it comes to previous shows, I go back and I watch them just when I have time, and I'm constantly discovering new episodes, even in Next Generation. And I thought I'd seen all of that one, but there are so many new ones that I hadn't seen.
Yeah, and there are some that you actively suppress and then forget about, and then you get to rediscover them like a bad penny.
This is true, yes. Before Riker found his beard, as they say.
So what are you missing? You made an allusion to New Trek. So what are you missing as far as the newer shows?
Okay, if we go with strictly the newer shows, I have not seen any of Strange New Worlds. Desperate to do that because I hear nothing but good things,
Mm-hmm.
and I have not seen the latest of Picard, which desperate to see that because I know it features, as you mentioned earlier, one of my favorite Trek characters, Q. So I'm on pins and needles for the holiday season to roll around so I can finally get my hands on those shows.
So, but you're also missing Lower Decks, you told me earlier.
This is true. I haven't seen any of Lower Decks. And that one, as we talked about, how I love silliness, is like the best of both worlds. Ha ha. See what I did there? Pun intended. Because, yeah, you've got your silliness, you've got Star Trek. We're kind of poking fun at some of the sillier sides of Trek, and it's everything I would love. So, yeah, I've got to find time for that. But that's another one of those things as a father with two kids, one 6 years old, one 3, it is so hard to find time for myself anymore.
How about Prodigy and Discovery?
I haven't seen season 4 of Star Trek Discovery yet, and I also have not seen Prodigy.
Well, Prodigy, I think, is actually airing on Nickelodeon. So if you get Nickelodeon, you can watch it. If you get it.
I don't believe I do, but there might be some weird way that I don't know. I can't keep track of I know the stuff that I stream. I don't know all the stuff my kids stream. So I'm going to have to research that one.
All right. Fair enough. Fair enough. You were watching all the episodes. You were looking at it as you were growing up. Have you ever been to a Star Trek convention?
Not a Star Trek convention, but I have been to various comic conventions. I did go to the San Diego Comic-Con a couple of times. And one of my memories of that was one morning when I got up, I went by myself, once again, experiencing these things alone. I got up to go have breakfast at the hotel. It was a Ramada Inn. And I went down there and just sat down, just quietly eating my meal because I don't know anybody. But everyone around me is dressed up as cosplay. And they were specifically where I was at somehow was the Star Trek wing of all the people. I guess Ramada Inn and Star Trek go hand in hand for San Diego Comic-Con. But I distinctly remember I'm eating my just pancakes, and to my right, there's a Klingon quietly sipping some coffee. And on the other side is Spock from the Mirror Universe. So very specific Spock eating pancakes himself. So yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. So
nice.
And I did happen to see the cast of Next Generation there, but it being San Diego Comic-Con, they were like really hands off. Like if you don't pay for them, you can't even look at them. So I just kind of caught a glimpse and that was it.
Yeah, San Diego Comic-Con is quite the experience. I mean, it's a mad rush of a mad number of people.
Oh, absolutely. It's one of those things. I recommend experiencing it if you can. Now that I've done it twice, though, I'm done. I have no desire to go back. I've come to really appreciate smaller conventions ever since then.
So you're going to go to one of the mission conventions or to what used to be called STLV?
I would love to if I can find the time and the resources. Yeah, because I've heard you talk about it a few times on this podcast. I've seen pictures. It's like, boy, that looks great. I want to do that. I want to someday.
So no conventions then in your immediate future?
Not Star Trek ones. I have some small conventions here around me that I'll be going to attend because like a free comic book day, if you're familiar with that, like the local comic book shop here. I really love this place. I'll give him, if you want to put it on here, it's a free shout out to them, Rick's Comic City, because they let people like me, independent creators and independent artists from our community actually come in and just peddle our wares and meet with people and network with one another, and they don't charge us anything to do it. So I love going to do stuff with them. But there's other stuff here around us, like Clarksville Con. I'll do that. There's a town nearby called Hopkinsville. They're going to have Hoptown Fan Fest. You get the idea. It's small local conventions. They're more intimate. And, you know, when you have a bunch of independent folks like me at one table, and then you over two tables over, you have like Brent Spiner and Geordie LaForge, people are going to ignore us. So when it's a little bitty convention and everybody's basically my level of quote unquote fame, they're going to come talk to me a little bit more.
Well, but that is a thing, though, right? In comics world, there is like a free comic day, right? I vaguely recall something about this. It's like Wednesdays or something like that.
Okay, Wednesdays are new comic book day. That's when the latest issues from the big publishers are put out. So the comic book
Okay.
shops get the comics on Wednesday. Free comic book day is the first Saturday of May every year. And the publishers put out free comics. Like you literally do not have to pay for them. And what the publishers utilize them for, like DC and Marvel, they'll the next big event or the next what's going on. They promote that to readers. Meanwhile, the shops, they, because it attracts so many people, they'll have their own kind of promotions that they'll do, and they'll give away free comics sometimes. And then on top of that, they've invited me to come. They've had podcasters from the area, and it becomes this really big, cool event. And you get cosplayers to that. Now, I've yet to see any Star Trek cosplayers there. They tend to dress up as superheroes, but it's
Sure,
comic
sure.
books, so naturally can't get too upset.
A note for my listeners, I actually set up at a little local sci-fi convention that happened here in Vegas a few years ago. This was very early. This might have been like episodes like 12 or 13 or something like that. I'd have to look it up. But I actually had random people just walk in and I would interview them. And I actually had the youngest guest ever on Trek Profiles, 9 years old.
Oh, that must have been both fun and adorable.
So it was very cute. I interviewed her and her dad, and it was just fantastic. It was just fantastic. So if people are interested, I'll put a link up to that in the show notes. Okay, so are you a collector at all, Matt?
A little bit. Like I do collect the series. My wife got me the commemorative Blu-ray edition of the original series of Star Trek, which is great. And then, of course, all the new Trek. And right now I'm looking back. Like, let me get some good Blu-ray editions of Next Generation, because that's my first love. They're all every bit as valid, but that's the one that really hooked me. So yeah, of course I do have all the movies. And then in addition to that, I have a bunch of comics. I'm a big comic book collector, and I've gone back and read a lot of Star Trek comics, in fact, as well. Like the IDW did a long-running series that tied in with all of the new the Kelvin timeline movies. So stories in between each film. So that was really fun. Like there was one story. I wish I could remember what the story was about, but it was told from the perspective of, I always call him Cupcake, the guy that Kirk calls Cupcake, who ends up being on
Right.
his security crew, and he kind of reflects on the journey that they went with together. Like, we hated each other, but now there's no one I'd rather serve under. And it was really cool stuff. Just those little backstories. I get into those, even though they're technically not canon. But that's the extent. I don't collect models or anything like that. Because space is so valuable, and you can.
Yeah, no, I get it. I get it.
The nice thing about books and DVDs or Blu-rays is they're all 90 degrees, so you can stack them up easily.
Yeah. And they fit in boxes great. They fit on shelves great. Super easy.
Mm-hmm.
So do you keep up with all the various Star Trek comics, all the IDW stuff and all that?
Not to the extent that I used to. I read all. They have since discontinued that line. I'm sure they're publishing something else. But they went all the way through for the third film, and then they did a sort of follow-up. I think it was called Star Trek Boldly Go. And I wish I could remember the story, but it actually had the crew of that one actually encounter the Borg. So that was kind of interesting. So there's like one of the covers shows Kelvin Timeline Spock all Borged out. So it was a fun story. Not super meaningful, or it didn't really resonate a lot, but cool visuals, I gotta say. It was a lot of fun.
Matt, have you ever worn a Star Trek cosplay or a Star Trek uniform?
Yes.
Tell me.
This is it's not super elaborate. I was just Kirk, but my wife, at the time we were dating, we had only been dating a couple of months at the time, and Halloween was coming up, and we are both super, super into Halloween, but neither one of us really knew that yet. You know how it is when you're dating, you only slowly reveal little bits of your craziness to the other person. So, but I had revealed how much I liked Star Trek, and she watched 2009 with me, and that's part of why that one is really special to me. We were dating, it got her into it, and so I was Kirk, she was Uhura, and now of course she's white. Yes, I know, but anyway, but but that was it. It was just I was wearing the standard white Star Trek original series uniform, and she was wearing the standard Uhura uniform. Now, of course, she wore tights underneath the skirt, because it's she comes from a conservative family, and it gets cold in West Kentucky in October.
So I need to know more about this, Matt. So what is the thought process for a dating Trekkie to go through to decide when do I talk about the craziness of the Star Trek fandom. Can you advise any of my dating listeners on how they should think about this?
Oh my gosh, it's been 10 years. I don't even remember how to date anymore. I barely knew at the time. Um, you know what? If I was going to recommend anything, just like with anything, go slowly. Don't reveal all your craziness at once, but maybe do it in a way where you kind of reveal when you do it, reveal it why it's special. Don't just say, "Oh, I love Star Trek," and then go, let's like say, "I like Star Trek because," and it's just like you do with this show. Like, why is it personal to you? And when you explain that to a person, at the very least, they're going to understand why you love it. It's like, for instance, my wife was big into Twilight, and I'm sure a whole bunch of eyes listening to this might be glazing over as I say that, but my wife explained why she liked it. I didn't quite get into it to the level that she did, but I understood. It's like, okay, I can that's fair enough. So that would be my advice.
Matt, so I think the next question from my perspective is, have you done, or when will you do, a Mirror Universe Star Trek themed Halloween theme for your house? You said you were really big into Halloween, so it seems like that's the kind of thing you might do. So I'm just putting that out there, and I want to know if you've done this, or if you want to do it, or when you're going to do it.
You know, we haven't thought of a mirror universe theme, but since we do Halloween, it's always I always call it Disney spooky. So it's like, we have some spooky stuff, but it's never like to the level of like Nightmare on Elm Street levels, because we have 4 and 5-year-olds in our neighborhood that go past. But I'm really heavy into steampunk.
Okay.
And for anybody, and a quick, just in case anybody's not familiar, steampunk is this kind of idea of if steam powered technology were allowed to keep going, and that became the new sci-fi. And I really love the idea of a steampunk Borg. So if I could come up with some way to create a steampunk Borg to meet people out on the lawn, that's an ultimate life goal for me. The problem is I'm not very good at cosplay. I have to buy stuff ready made and then sort of implement it. But if I could ever find a way to really get a good looking steampunk Borg and be out there greeting people, that would make my night.
See, I'm like you. I love to do cosplay. But I have 2 rules about it, which is, one is that I actually want to do the character. I don't just want to be like, hey, look, it's John in a costume. I actually go out and try to do the character. And the second thing is that I don't want to do anything that involves like a lot of crafting, because I'm not crafty. Yeah. So, I'll hire a makeup artist or something like that where they can come in and just, do something. And, if I just got to buy an outfit, I can buy an outfit, provided it doesn't cost too much. But then I go out and I try to sell it, and that's the fun part, for me, not the crafting. I am not into that. But there's people like, oh, all I got to do is get a, Dremel tool. It's like, stop right there.
Yeah.
You lost me at Dremel tool.
Yeah, I can create stuff on Photoshop, but yeah, real life, forget it.
So, Matt, the M5 has done some gentle internet sleuthing, and it's given me something to ask about, and I'm not sure what this is, so you'll have to explain this to me. Please tell me about YouTube at Captain Picard and Ahab.
Okay. Well, I am an independent writer, independent comics creator. I've got a handful of the goofy little comics to my credit. One of them is called Moby Dick Back from the Deep. And the story is about Moby Dick in modern times returning as this zombified sea creature. And he's followed closely behind by zombified versions of Ahab and his crew. So the idea for this germinated from, I don't know how many people remember, there was a made-for-TV miniseries featuring Patrick Stewart as Ahab. If you haven't seen it, I recommend it simply because it is Patrick Stewart at his over-the-top best. It is phenomenal, and I'm convinced they only gave it to him because of the Ahab moments of Star Trek First Contact. But anyway, somebody on YouTube created this horrible mashup video where they combined different clips of different films. And I think one of them was Moby Dick with Stewart. And another one was clips from an old 80s movie called Millennium with an aircraft carrier. And they pieced all this together to make it look like Ahab traveled through time to bring back this aircraft carrier and drop a nuke on the whale and destroy it. And the final clip I cannot do this justice because again, it's Patrick Stewart at his best. They had this clip of Ahab standing on the edge of the Pequod, his ship, with his arm in the air, just screaming in absolute triumph. That stuck with me. And so the the image stuck with the idea of Ahab hunting the whale throughout time just really resonated with me. I took out the time travel aspect and came up with the idea of the whale has been out there for centuries. Ahab has been cursed to keep hunting it, and he's been hunting it for more than a century. So, what would he be like? And so, yeah, there's a lot to the M5 gave you a really deep thing to dive into there.
Oh, that's pretty cool. Now, you're going to have to dig up that link and send it to me, Matt, because I think this is the kind of thing people are going to want to see.
Oh, absolutely. I'd be happy to. Yeah, that's on my website.
Oh, for sure, because that is exactly the kind of stuff that people... I will put that in the show notes.
Okay.
People will love to see that. So send me that link and we will get it in there. All right. Well, then I think it's time to talk about some episodes. Are you game?
Absolutely.
All right. Well, then let's do a little bit of a recap. We've already talked about 2 different episodes. We already talked about Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan and Star Trek 2009. Did you want to say anything in addition about those 2 particular episodes, or did we cover what made them special and meaningful to you?
You know, we really covered Wrath of Khan, but there might be a little bit more I could tell you about 2009.
All right, go for it.
Sure. Like I said, my wife and I saw this together. We had just started dating, and I think this might be where she really realized what a Star Trek fan I was, because I went in to watch that, and I knew nothing going in about this. The only things that I knew was there was IDW, again, IDW Comics, they did a prelude series that told the story of how Spock ended up in the past. So I had read those comics just days before we went, and so I knew that Nimoy was going to be in this. And so I was kind of excited. And I just distinctly remember as we watched that movie, the two things stand out with me. One, um, I have, we have vivid memories of the original films where Spock's mother is alive. And so, I'm sure everybody knows, spoiler alert, 13 years later, 2009, Spock's mother dies and Vulcan is wiped out. And I distinctly remember, like, my wife and I were holding hands because we just started dating and we were so cute and adorable. But I think I started like squeezing her fingers to the point that they were turning white because I'm just like, no, what, no, just really freaking out over that. And then I just remember when Kirk is on that ice planet and we see this old man with a fire and a torch come in waving off this. I don't think we ever got a name for that beast that was coming after him, but he wards it off. And I knew before he turned around who it was. And I think I started like gripping my wife's wrist. I was a bit more gentle this time. I was like, it's him, it's him, it's him. And I think that's where she really fell in love with my love of Star Trek, just because she could see the way I reacted, how meaningful a lot of this was to me. And I wasn't angry at the changes they made. They hit me and it resonated with me. And that's the way fiction is supposed to work. And so that's one of the reasons why 2009 is a really special one for me.
All right. That's a wonderful story, Matt. Thank you.
Sure.
So another one that you wanted to talk about was The Best of Both Worlds. You already made a reference to it at one point earlier in our conversation. And of course, this was the one that was broken over 2 seasons. So we had a season ender and a season opener. So tell me about this one.
Oh, yeah. Speaking of freaking out, this is another great story about me just losing it. Watching by myself, again, discovered this one. I believe I saw these as they aired because I remember that gap. I watched that whole first episode, and some of my memories are the cinematography and the music for that were just phenomenal. Like, they really delivered what a big deal this episode was. I just remember where they're being chased by the Borg for the first time, and and Picard just says on screen, magnify. And then you see the full cube and that music just hits. And just describing it, I get chills because it's like, oh my gosh. And I was terrified of the Borg because I was young when I saw this, and I actually saw the introduction episode with Q, God bless him. And I just remember how much that episode frightened me. Just the concept of what was happening and how they could not stop it. And so, yeah, then they kidnap Picard. I really start freaking out. and then like they're face to face. I don't realize, because I'm too young to note about time frames. I don't know that this show is definitely about to end, and all I see is Picard on the screen, all acutest up, and Riker just says, "Ready, fire." Screen goes black, and then executive producer pops up, and I just freak out. What? What? And then I had to wait half a year to find out how it worked out. But again, it just stuff like that just is again why I'm hooked, because it was such compelling storytelling, grabs me because I loved Picard. Picard is my favorite captain, and like I think I was legitimately worried, like, is he not coming back? Like, is this it? Is he gone? And to their credit, later episodes they kind of explored alternate universes where he didn't come back, and how did that play out? And so yeah, that's I think the reason that one sticks out in my mind the most is how much it traumatized me with that cliffhanger finale.
It sounds like you've taken some things from Star Trek to put into your own work as a creative person.
Oh, definitely. And there's probably things in there that I don't even realize they are. But I think the biggest thing that goes with me is the importance of, and just the wonderfulness, if that's a word, of just curiosity. Just never stop asking questions, always be ready to learn more, because like that's the heart of Star Trek in so many ways. Like in the original series, Klingons are absolute villains. They're just, there's really nothing to like about them in the course of that series. Well, later on we find out now they're allies. Well, how did that happen? Well, then the movies explained why. um, but that's how it is. Like so many of them, they start out enemies. We come to learn about one another. We ask questions and we just sit down and talk. We get to know one another. And we can become allies, or if nothing else, at least we're not at each other's throats anymore. And that's, I think, just that curiosity and just the eagerness to always learn new things about new people, new cultures, new everything. Certainly, yeah, is in the stuff that I write. Even though so much of it is horror, and the whole concept there is that you're terrified of something and you just want to get away from it. But I've always thought of Star Trek as sort of like the chapter two, whereas the horror story is the chapter one. It was like, well,
Mm-hmm.
okay, the initial meeting, and the Borg are a classic example here. When we first met the Borg, they terrified me. Well, then later on, we meet Hugh, and we humanize the Borg, and we start to learn about them and find out what they are. They stop being so scary. And I've seen people complain online like, "Oh, you remember when the Borg were terrifying?" It's like, well, that's the whole point of Star Trek. You start out frightened, but then you learn about something, and as you learn about it, you find out more about it. You realize, maybe we don't really have to fear it. Maybe we can coexist with it. Maybe we can learn from one another. So yeah, and so all of my stories, like Moby Dick, could even be a prime example here. Like if we had another chapter, maybe they could sit down and actually learn from this zombified whale and find out some way to coexist with it. But I don't tell that part of the story.
You mentioned horror, so let's talk about an episode where we get to know somebody and then we decide we don't want to know them. Let's talk about schisms. This is a case where learning all about the bad guy makes us not want to have any part of them. So this is, of course, Star Trek does horror. We have the terrible sort of fish creatures, and now I can't get that out of my mind. I read in some of the trivia that one of the creators on the show called those the fish monks. And once they're called fish monks, you can't get it out of your head because you see them kind of waddling around in their robes with the fish faces, and I'm like, oh, it's the fish monks. So tell me about this particular episode and what about it is meaningful to you.
Well, it's a classic horror story. It's very well done. And one of the things that horror, the best horror is what frightens us most is the unknown. And what makes the fish monks so scary is we don't know anything about them. We just know what's happening, and we only discover it after the fact. And that almost makes it even worse. Like the absolute just invasion that happens, and that one really sort of horrifying moment is when they tell Riker, like, "Oh my gosh, your arm has been severed and then reattached. I can tell because it's like a micromillimeter off with your bone structure," and just various other things like that. Um, but I think what I would argue is if we ever encountered them again in Star Trek, to me, classic Star Trek would be this: if they kept encountering them, eventually, and it might take 1,000 years, but eventually, if they ever just stopped, talked, and kind of found out, like, why are you curious about us? Why are you doing this? We don't like that you're doing this. And you might find out that they just didn't know, because one of the classic things about Star Trek, with meeting new races from other worlds with completely different ideals and belief systems, like, it may not be a big deal for one race to, like, well, just attach their arm and then put it back on, no big deal. Whereas with us, that's rather horrifying. But again, we don't get that far. It stays very much a horror story, and it's left really open ended. Classic horror story there, where where Riker says, someone suggests, like, maybe they're just curious, and I think Riker says, considering what they did to us, somebody's dead. Which, of course, when we saw them die, they were wearing red pajamas. It's always got to be red. But they said, these guys were more than just curious. I don't know that we want to know about them, and that's as far as we get. And that it really that's a great horror ending, because you're just left kind of wondering and worried, like, oh my gosh, what would happen if we met these people again?
As I was rewatching the episode in preparation for this, there were two things that occurred to me. First of all, Mott the Bullion Barber is always awesome and makes everything better by 1,000%. So there's that. Minor note, but very cool. Second thing is, I was thinking about what you had talked about, the horror elements of the story, and I realized, of course, that is the biggest trope in all horror films. It's the baddies are somewhere else and they're trying to get here. Right? They're trying to invade our dimension. They're trying to get in the house. They're trying to get inside your body or whatever. That's the cheeseburger of horror, right? It's like there's a billion of them, and when it's done right, it's just delicious. Right?
Yes, absolutely.
But it's a trope, and I thought, oh man, Star Trek is going to do this? I don't know, but you watch it, and it really is just very satisfying. But it's a very traditional story in so many ways.
It is, and there are certain aspects of it that I kind of, when I rewatched it before we did this, I cringed a little bit when they're in the holodeck recreating the sequence, and everybody's acting like they don't know what they're rebuilding, the table that in effect they were on and being operated on. And as they're designing it, they keep acting like, well, I wonder what this is. I wonder what's, like, you guys know at this point. You have to know. And then the tools and instruments, of course, they're very mean looking. It's not simply a tube. It's like a jagged edged knife and scissors, like, something scary. Um, so yeah, but that's really kind of minor. Because overall, the main premise was this kind of slow realization that these people had been kidnapped, and they had
Yeah.
no memory of it, and just they all shared this experience, like, oh my gosh. And so that's very good. That's good horror. And Star Trek, it was subtle and it was small, but it did it very, very well.
One of the things I was thinking about as I was watching it was the scene at the end when Riker is aware that he's been kidnapped and he's on the bed, and they got this, jagged knife about 3 inches from his face. And I just kind of wanted to go back in time and sort of see what Frakes said when they brought him out onto the set and said, get on the table, and he's like looking at that knife about 3 inches from his face. I'd be thinking, don't get up, don't get up, don't get up too fast. Because I think I would be the guy who would, forget where I was and all of a sudden end up with a gash in the middle of my cheek or in my eyeball. That was the horror part to me, was I was thinking about the actor on the set.
Yeah, we could have done it with CG today, but back then they actually had to have real props there. So,
All right, well, let's move on to a different kind of horror. I'm using the term very loosely. Let's talk about Star Trek Enterprise, the episode Terra Prime. So this, of course, is the one where we have Peter Weller as the leader of some sort of xeno-racist human group that wants to expel all the non-humans from the from Earth. And I think I think it's actually a 2-parter. We got a whole bunch of him in season 4. So tell me about this particular episode and what about it was noteworthy for you.
Sure, yeah. Enterprise is one I discovered after the fact. I guess I sort of got Star Trek'd out by the time I got through college, and I didn't watch Enterprise at all. And it was actually, credit to you, through conversations you had with people on this podcast, that got me interested in going back and rewatching it. And I sort of cheated.
Oh,
I heard.
that's great to hear.
Yeah, yeah. I sort of cheated though. I had heard people say watch the pilot episode and then just skip to season 3, which is what I did. So I'm sure I missed a lot of great stuff.
Shame on you.
I know. I'll go to my corner when we're done recording. Um, but this one, when I got to it, and I'm going to avoid getting too political here because I don't want to, but it happened at a time. I was watching at a time when kind of xenophobic tendencies were really happening here in our country of America, and that's as far as I'll take that. And just because of some of what I was seeing happening outside, really mirrored a lot of what I was seeing from the villain of this story. What I've got it written down here, John Frederick Paxton, which is
Mm-hmm.
such a great American Texas villain type name. But the ideals that he was espousing and the rationalization that he had was really mirroring some of the things that I was seeing. So that resonated with me a lot. But the way that it all worked out, and it has a heartbreaking conclusion, of course, with the to Paul and oh my gosh,
Trip Tucker.
Tucker. There we go. Thank you. Sorry. Yeah, to Paul and Tucker's child dying at the end, which is very heart wrenching. But one of the sort of things that I took from that was when it comes to progress, this sort of things like there's always going to be bumps in the road. That's inevitable. But John Frederick Paxton, what he was pulling for, we sort of knew this watching it. And so this gives a little added resonance, I think, because we know that it's a prequel. And we know that ultimately he's going to fail even before we see it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, really, he was always doomed to failure because progress is always going to happen. We can slow it down, and the most ardent people who don't like the progress that's happening can fight it and try to stop it. But and this might be a little idealistic, but again, it's a Star Trek. The good really does kind of win out in the end with these things. Like my father used to say, and still does say, "This too shall pass." That it's always darkest before the dawn. There will be some hardships and there will be some struggle, but it will resolve itself. And as we know with Star Trek, Paxton completely fails, and he's forgotten by the sands of history as far as the Federation is concerned. The aliens, they do come to Earth. We do unite. We do create this Federation, and we do move forward, as was it was inevitable. He could fight it all he wants to. The best he could have hoped for would have just been to delay it. And I think that was sort of a hopeful message that stuck with me later on. Like, the stuff I was seeing around me was disheartening in a lot of ways, but the stuff that was disheartening me is always doomed to failure. It's not going to succeed in the long run. I may not even live to see it not succeed, but eventually it won't. The good and maybe that hope is something that has been instilled in me from watching Star Trek as a child, but it's that was a big thing that I took from that episode. That's why it resonated with me so much.
Yeah, I mean, I think Star Trek is inherently optimistic about humanity, right? And I think that's almost, and I say this like almost every episode these days, but it feels like that's almost a heretical thing to say, right? Is that things are going to be better in the future? People are like, no, everything's going downhill, People really want to wallow in that. And I think, well, I have optimism.
Well, it should be noted, Star Trek does say there's going to be this epic world war that's going to result in billions dead before that happens, so... So maybe not super optimistic, but yeah, you're right. Absolutely right.
Okay, let's talk about a couple more episodes. Let's talk about Deep Space Nine Duet. Now, this one comes up on Trek Profiles quite a bit. People love this episode, love to talk about it, but I'm interested in your particular take on this episode that is all about the war criminal and about Eamon Maritza. So tell me, Matt, what's going on?
Eamon Maritza, yes, and it's all to do with Maritza, the character. The performance is just fantastic by I've got his name here because I wanted to make sure. Harris Yulin. I've seen him in so many things. Ghostbusters 2, something wildly different. If anybody remembers him as the mean-spirited judge, just a testament to what a great actor he is. But his delivery in this is amazing, and so much of it, it's just television, so you don't have the benefit of like a John Williams soundtrack to back it up. It's all on him to deliver it. And if you can find clips of him, and it just sends chills down my spine every time I see it. It's amazing. But just it's classic science fiction, classic Trek, where we take a kind of a real world scenario, change it up a bit, make it an alien world so that it becomes a little bit more palatable. Because if you just tried to tell people to sympathize with somebody who worked in a Nazi concentration camp, well, they're not going to do it. That's a tall, tall order. I mean, maybe it could be done, but it's going to take a good 4 to 6 hours of television time to make us sympathize with that character at all. But it brings up a fantastic point, and I'm sure this has been mentioned many, many times, but the Kardashian Bajoran is a pretty clear metaphor, I think, for the concentration camps of World War II with Nazi and the Jewish citizens at the time. What this brings up is, not everybody that worked in those camps was a ruthless monster. Not everybody just wanted to slaughter other people. Some of them were just people working a job. They were just trying to pay the bills, provide for their families, put food on the table, whatever, and didn't really have any sort of control over what was going on because they weren't connected to Hitler. These are just filing clerks, just like Maritza here. And when the war was over, what sort of baggage did they carry with them? We talked about, and rightly so, all the suffering that happened from the victims there, the people within those camps, which was awful. I do not want to minimize that at all, but we did sort of forget about some of the experiences, people who were just working, just witnessed all of this. Well, those people, the war's over, they leave. Those memories are still there. And what does that do to you to carry that kind of a memory with you? And that's what Maritza did here with the story here. It's like, to me, he was such a perfect stand-in because when he talks about it and you finally get that reveal at the end where he just breaks down and you see the beginnings of one of the lines he has that sticks with me where Kira is telling him like you're Maritza. Stop trying to tell me you're Goldar Heel. You're Maritza. And he actually says, "You mistake me for that whimpering nothing." And it's almost like in his mind, as monstrous as Goldar Heel was, he was a better person than him because at least he was doing something. Whereas like all he saw of himself was like all I did was cower under my bed at night and cry because I couldn't handle what was happening out there and I was too scared to do anything. And because of that, he carried that guilt with him and he wanted to be put on trial, punished, and likely executed at the hands of the very people he felt like he had a hand in hurting. And it's again, you couldn't tell that story, especially not in a fictional setting, with an actual former Nazi character. But
Mhm.
you can do that with a metaphor, with a Cardassian that makes you make that connection and wonder, like, how many people that we didn't know. We know about all the suffering from the victims, but what about the people who were just there and they carry this kind of maybe it's a minor version of PTSD, but it's still a bit of PTSD that they're going to carry with them the rest of their days. And the episode does not have a really tidy conclusion at all. It's just like life. And kind of ironic with such an optimistic show of Star Trek here, but gosh, it made such a great point and it stayed with me forever. I've never forgotten that episode.
So, at the risk of stepping on a landmine here, I would like you to explain to me, in your point of view, exactly what level of culpability you feel Maritza has.
Boy, that's hard because even Kira said, there was nothing you could have done. And the truth is, yeah, he couldn't have stopped it. It was still going to happen because all he was a filing clerk. But, as far as culpability goes, he could have walked away. Maybe he wouldn't have stopped it, but he wouldn't have been part of it. This is not a great analogy, but for instance, there are certain businesses out there that I try not to buy, certain restaurants that I don't like for various reasons because I disagree with some of the actions of their owners. Um, it's not making a difference. I don't think of it as a boycott. They're still doing just fine without my help, but they're not doing it with my money. It's small, but it kind of almost like at least I'm not helping feed that machine. Whereas Maritza, as far as culpability goes, maybe he could have at least left, but didn't. And it's one of those things.
So,
What I
he
have done,
does have culpability.
I think he does. I think he
I
does
mean,
have
he's
a little
not
bit.
Goldar Heel, but he has some
No, no,
culpability.
but he was there, and yeah, so he didn't do anything at all, and maybe there wasn't anything he could have done, but we'll never really know. And a big question here is, because I've looked at people that I said they made the wrong call. I don't know if I would have made the right call either. That's the other thing that's great about this episode because it makes you think, well, if it was me, would I have done any better? And it's hard to say because I've never been faced with what Maritza was faced with there. Is he culpable? Yes. Would I have done better? I don't know.
One of the things this reminds me of is Hannah Arendt, who wrote quite a bit about Nazis, quite a bit about the concentration camps and all that. She talked about this idea of the banality of evil, or banality of evil, and this idea that people become disconnected from their own humanity under certain circumstances, right? Like, and she was specifically, I think, addressing this kind of behavior where these people were complicit. They were cogs in this great machine of evil. And you think, how can that happen, right? And this is what she wrote about. She was a historian and wrote quite extensively about this in I think the 50s and 60s. So I would encourage listeners to go check out the works of Hannah Arendt for more on this particular topic. But that's exactly what what she was talking about, was this kind of thing. So I thought you might find that interesting.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. So let's talk about another episode. Let's talk about Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country.
Okay.
So this is one of everybody's favorites, Matt. So why is it yours? One of yours?
Several reasons. One, it's based on a point in history, Chernobyl, as I understand it, that kind of was the genesis of this idea that, and the irony here is that the Klingons were the Russians here. And for me, I always saw the Romulans as the Russians, but that's neither here nor there. But again, it's classic Trek, classic science fiction where an alien race stands in for a real world scenario where Chernobyl happened, Russia was no longer the big enemy we thought they were. Could we coexist? History has not been kind to that question, but Star Trek asks that question, like, could we coexist with the Klingons? And the fact that it was part of a bit of history that I was there for, because I remember that incident, and I remember the Iron Curtain falling. So it's kind of cool that what they're basing it on is a bit of history that I was there for, also dates me a bit. But the real reason I think that this stands out with me the most is, one, it's the first Star Trek movie I got to see in a theater because I had experienced all the other ones. It's like when this one was coming out, not only had I not seen it, but it was going to be my last chance to see the old crew on the big screen. So I wanted to go see it. And then just to kind of further add to the hallmarkiness of this memory, I saw it with my father. And I'd been watching so much Star Trek was on my own, but this time my father actually went with me. It was just him and me. Nobody else went with us. It was on a trip to I'm pretty sure we were in Louisville, Kentucky, where his family lives. And we, for whatever reason, I don't remember any of the particulars surrounding it, but I just remember that we both went to watch this movie together and we both really enjoyed it walking away from it. And it's a good movie regardless. We could get into all the intricacies of the film, so naturally we enjoyed it, but that just makes, there's no real added reason as far as the story itself why it's special to me. It's all about everything around it. The fact that I got to see it with my dad, it's one of my memories with my father, and again, first time I got to see Trek in a theater, and that's why that one just sticks out with me. And every time I watch it, I remember that experience. So yeah, Star Trek VI is extremely special for me.
So one of the things you talked about in our various emails back and forth before we began recording is that you're a big fan of Q, and so we should probably talk about a Q episode, and the one that you selected for us to talk about was Tapestry. So this, of course, is Star Trek does This Is Your Life, Jean-Luc Picard. So tell me about Tapestry and what is significant and or noteworthy in this episode for you.
All right. Well, speaking of Q, yeah, he's such a perfect foil for Jean-Luc Picard in every single way, not just as just a nuisance, but his personality is completely against Picard. But this episode, I'm pretty sure up until then, Q has been a nemesis. Like even in the episode where he became human, and the crew helps him regain his Q-hood, godhood, whatever we call it. They do it grudgingly, and we don't really like him so much. I mean, he's entertaining, but I would not want to hang out with him. But this one, by the end of the episode, Q sort of evolves and almost to a more benevolent perspective this time. He's been an enemy for so long.
A benevolent guide.
Yeah, very good. Benevolent guide, because he's sort of like the the clockmaker character from mentioned This Is Your Life, the guy showing Picard how things would be if he had done things differently, where Picard really, unlike This Is Your Life, where it's all kind of a moment of just anger. He just like, I wish I'd never been born. Picard's like, I wish I really had done things differently. And we've all wished that. And Q gives him that. It's like, okay, well, here's what would have happened. And had he been more cautious with his life and not made the mistakes that he just regrets so much, he never would have become what he became. Like he's just a lowly science officer that no one takes seriously. And they even tell him, like, you're so careful. That's why you've never risen in the ranks any higher. And he realizes that at the end. And I think you really can tell that it bothers him that he has to give credit to Q for teaching him an important lesson. Like, I think he says, like, I can't believe I'm saying this, but he really gave me a gift. And so, yeah. And that was the first time Q became something more than just another Star Trek villain. He became a really important kind of storytelling device that could be brought back for various other purposes. And so, yeah, I love Q. Such a great character. And yeah, I could go on and on about Q. He's so entertaining just in general.
Well, I think what you're going to have to do is go out and get yourself Picard Season 3 and watch it, because there's a lot of Q in that. And then you're going to have to fill my listeners in on whether your opinion of Q has gotten better, gotten worse, or stayed about the same. Because it's a very different kind of Q in that. I don't think we're giving anything away. It's just a very different sort of perspective on the Q character. And I think it opens the door to reassess the character. I think I'll leave it to you to decide whether or not it's favorable or unfavorable, but that's your call.
Okay,
does that sound like a deal?
Enough. That works.
Fair enough. So, Matt, we've been going on a while here. We've been talking about the various different kinds of episodes that you like and sort of why Star Trek's important to you. We talked about how you started watching it when you were a kid, and you're now engaging with me to record a podcast about it. So I'll just put the question to you quite simply. Why is Star Trek important to you? Why does it matter?
I mentioned this earlier. It's the importance of curiosity, just willingness to just keep on learning. And like the success of the Federation has always been the fact that one of their ideals is to just keep learning, like explore strange new worlds, seek out new life and new civilizations, boldly go where no one has gone before. Just keep on learning. There's always more to learn, and never lose that sense of wonder about the new things that are out there. Like when you experience like a completely alien culture to your own, like even just here, like I haven't had a chance to travel the world very much. So I know that if I traveled to a country in Africa, a lot of that would be very alien to me. But rather than be intimidated by it and scared of it, learn from it, like just experience it and just appreciate it, and just like, and then ask questions like, well, where'd this come from? Where'd your culture come from? Why do you feel the way that you do? I think that's the biggest thing that Trek I've taken, and everything that I've just throughout life in general, just to keep on learning and always appreciate learning and enjoy learning. And never come at anything from a position of judgment, always from a position of like, here's a new thing that I can experience.
Well, Matt, I've enjoyed our conversation, but I have to tell you that the M5 is now signaling me that it's time for the Kobayashi Maru lightning round.
All right.
The Kobayashi Maru is a challenging and difficult test, cunningly prepared by the M5. Should you not only survive the test, but pass it as well, the M5 will award you an honorary Star Trek title. Are you ready to face the Kobayashi Maru, Matt?
As ready as I'm going to be.
M5, load the Kobayashi Maru simulator and prepare to record Matt's responses.
Simulation loaded.
Question 1. You've become a Star Trek villain's henchman. Are you a Borg drone, a Cardassian soldier, or a Suliban temporal warrior?
Borg drone.
What are we learning today? Vulcan neuropressure or Klingon Mokbara?
Klingon Mokbara.
Which of these is the worst place to grow up in the Federation? Copernicus City on Luna, Lake Elnar on Beta Z, or the Tendara Colony?
Any place on Beta Z.
Choose your favorite Borg part. The cortical node, the vocal subprocessor, or the assimilation tubule?
The vocal subprocessor.
Which of these Enterprise bingo challenges would be hardest for you? Phaser Stun Club, Use the Transporter to Replace Gum, or Medical Tricorder Challenge Vulcan Marsupial?
Medical Tricorder Challenge, without a doubt.
All right, there we go. Simulation complete. M5, please compute the results and tell us if our guest has passed the Kobayashi Maru.
Analyzing.
Matt, I am pleased to tell you that the M5 has calculated that you have passed the Kobayashi Maru simulation. Congratulations, sir.
Yes, sweet.
And now, the M5, who has analyzed your answers, will award you an honorary Star Trek title on behalf of our podcast. M5, what title shall we award our guest?
Matt is awarded the title of Solingen-based Lifeforms Representative to the Federation Science Council.
So, there you go.
Very appropriate.
Matt, please tell people how they can get in touch with you, where they can find your comics, where they can keep up with all your various goings-on, and continue the conversation.
Sure, yeah. I have my own website, which is mattschorr.net. That's MATTSCHORR.net. Anything you want to learn about me, you can always start there. Along with all my social media channels are all on there. But if you want them, I am very active on Twitter, as we mentioned earlier, at the Matt Schorr. Can see a lot of goofy shenanigans from me trolling on every bit of fandom that I love. The only reason I troll it is because I love it. You can also catch me on Instagram at The Schorr. I'm also experimenting with TikTok at The One Matt Schorr. That's the numeral 1 Matt Schorr. And if I'm allowed a cheap plug for my own podcast, I have one that I do on a monthly basis called Tales from a Small Town Journalist, which is all about just the weird and wonderful stories that you only hear from reporters working in small communities.
Oh, that's fantastic. And I will put links up to all of that in the show notes for the episode, which is on my website, so people can find all of that there and links to all of your various social media and your website and all of that stuff. Matt, thank you so much for being part of Trek Profiles.
Oh, thanks for having me. This was a blast.
Here ends this installment of the Trek Profiles podcast, and before we offer a Trek quote to close this episode, I'd like to remind you that you may send us your pleasant proclamations of approval, your discordant dispatches of displeasure, selfie videos of yourself attempting the Vulcan Marsupial Enterprise Bingo Challenge to feedback@trekprofiles.com or on Facebook or Twitter at Trek Profiles. Anything you send us may be used in the show, or it may be buried deep, deep, deep beneath the Vasquez rocks, never to be seen again. This time, I leave you with a quote from Data, who in the episode Schisms said, quote, "Felis catus is your taxonomic nomenclature, an endothermic quadruped, carnivorous by nature." Close quote. Thanks for listening, and live long and prosper.
This handcrafted podcast is brought to you by Stars and Sky Media Lab. It's cosmic.
All right, fantastic. So, well, it's a pleasure to meet you.
Yeah, you too.
You talk to people on Twitter, and you tweet at people, and it's like, hey, there's a person behind all that, right?
Yeah, that's me. The clown behind the tweets is me.
The clown, is that you're self-referential that way?
It's first time I've said it, but it does fit. Because I don't like to get real serious on social media. I've never understood that. So.
Oh, me neither. In fact, I think some people take it far too seriously. I literally just go on there to, talk about Star Trek and amuse myself,
Yeah, that's what I what's funny, I've started doing stuff with TikTok a little bit too, and I like to kind of riff. You've seen, I'm sure. I'll goof on everything because I aspire to what Monty Python once said: if you can't laugh at something a little, then you don't really love it. So there's funny things about Star Trek and everything out there, but Star Trek fans aren't fun to goof on because they just roll with it. It's like, oh yeah, yeah, we're silly that way. Other fandoms get mad at me, and those are the ones I tease a little bit more.
I don't know, man. There's some very serious Star Trek fans out there that take this stuff very, very seriously, you know?
They are clearly not paying attention to me then. So I got to work on my visibility then.
So is this, so I think I first became aware of you through your memeing that you like to tweet out. So is that like your, is that sort of your calling card?
On social media, it certainly is. Yeah. Because it's twofold, because I use it as an independent writer. I like to promote myself, and I don't want my social media feed to be just nothing but, hey, buy my books, hey, do this for me or whatever. I like it to be every bit as much, if not more, conversational, laughing, silliness, because that's what I did ever since social media became a thing. That's all I really ever want to do, just goofy stuff and cats. That's all I wanted.
Well, you're wearing a cat shirt, so I guess that,
yeah, my wife got this for me, so I'm kind of proud of that.
Oh, that's good. That's good. I found this humorous.
Mm-hmm.
All right, good. Well, I'm wearing a Badgie shirt today, so I'm in Star Trek Lower Decks mode.
Cool.
Now, have you seen Lower Decks? I know you haven't seen it all, but
I have not seen any Lower Decks. That's one that's like, I know it's out there, and I can't find time to do it. I need to. It's right up.
Badgie's a thing. Badgie's a thing.
Well, it's exactly what I would like. It's Star Trek, and there's silliness involved. So it's like, it's what I've craved. So, but yeah, I
vast
can't find
quantities of that. Vast quantities of that.
Is that on Paramount Plus?
It's all on Paramount Plus.
Okay, that's why I haven't seen it.
It's all on. Yeah, of course you can always buy the discs too. So you can ask for those for, that could holidays or gifts or whatever.
That could be, yeah, I have to add that to my lineup. It keeps getting bigger though. It used to just be one show, but now there's 3. There's Picard, there's Strange New Worlds.
Yeah, but you know what you do? I mean, if you really want to, now's actually a pretty good time because they're in a lull between things, right? There's nothing on right now as far as new Star Trek. You can go get the free trial, binge it all, and then cancel.
I've done stuff like that. Yep.
So if you really want to, that's your strategy.
Yep, I can do that. It's a while, yeah, because what happens is I'm so behind when it comes to with all the latest episodes. So whenever I listen to one of yours, you'll start talking about the latest goings on in Discovery of Picard. It's like, oh darn it, gotta stop. And it's like, I'm going to come back to this, and then I end up doing other things. So yeah.
So you the spoiler warning puts you off it.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm happy you do it because I don't want to be spoiled. I get spoiled on so many things, so I'm able to avoid them when I can. But the trouble is, then life gets in the way, and I don't get to go back and start listening again.
Right. No, I get you. I actually have a very strict rule about podcasts. It's a little weird, and it's very arbitrary. But my rule is I don't subscribe to any more podcasts than I can safely listen to in a week. And that's a normal week of my life, right? It's not like a week where I'm, doing nothing but listening to podcasts or, it's like a normal week. I got about so many hours in the day and, that's it. And, there's ones that come out every once in a while and, some that come out like every week. And so I got to be like very careful. And my whole podcast listening has gotten thrown into the toilet because now I'm subscribed to a 1-hour daily podcast, which is so good.
Oh,
it's totally not related to this, but it's from the Telegraph in the UK, and it's their daily Ukraine war roundup podcast.
Oh, that would be fascinating.
And they they usually have on their military affairs guy and their foreign affairs correspondent just to talk about what happened today. And they usually have an interview with somebody. So it's like a half and half. And it's so well done and so informative. But it's like an hour every day. And so I'm listening to that. And then I was on vacation earlier this last month for 2 weeks. So there was I was backed up. Just now, I am getting sorted out. Just now. It's like I almost took a screenshot of my empty podcast player and posted it. I was like, I'm caught up.
It's like, for instance, my wife was big into Twilight, and I'm sure a whole bunch of eyes listening to this might be glazing over as I say that, but my wife explained why she liked it. I didn't quite get into it to the level that she did, but I understood. It's like, okay, I can That's fair enough. So that would be my advice.
You're going to have to say more about that, Matt, because I don't know anything about Twilight. So I'm going to have to ask you to give us your pitch here. Or give us her pitch.
Her pitch. Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, her pitch would simply be that the main characters, of course, do a quick recap for anybody here. You have Bella and Edward. Bella is the human girl. Edward is the vampire. Leaving out all the criticisms people have of how vampires are presented in this story, the bottom line is Edward falls in love with Bella. And to her, what resonated so much with her was that he's this deadly, vicious, potentially killing machine if he chose to be. But he chose not to be. And he chose not to be because he simply didn't want to be. And then furthermore, he became even more gentle by falling in love with this fragile human girl. And so there was just something about that resonated with her, that this being who could just wipe out an entire town if he really so chose, didn't want to. He didn't want to do that, and he wanted to do what was right by this human girl. So
see, this brings up all these questions, like how does he feed himself? Is he like ripping off blood banks? I mean, what's going on here?
Gosh, the fact that I know this almost embarrasses me. He's what was considered a vegetarian vampire, which is really goofy, but he feeds off of animals, strictly animals. His whole family, they strictly feed off of animals rather than humans because they don't want to kill anybody. So
he's like eating dogs and cats?
I think deer. I think there's an actual whole sequence in the later books, I didn't read them, where they actually they hunt down deer and bear in the woods. It's up in Alaska, or I think, it's Alaska. Gosh, it's been so long. I should be proud that I don't remember that much. But yeah, they hunt wild game. That's how they do it. So, the hunters ought to appreciate that, right?
Okay, I don't think I want to know any more about this. So that's enough of that. This might go in the bonus content.
Sure. Yeah, we've tapped my entire knowledge, I think, at this point.
I'm going to divert for just a second here, but have you ever read the Dune series?
No, I've started to, and I saw the old 80s movie, and I'm desperate to see the new one. So it's like, I know about it.
So can I spoil it for you?
Only a little.
Okay, well, here's the thing. And this is in if you see the movie that they made, right? I don't, which is excellent and is very, very good. And I'm a book reader, and I've read all the 6 original books. And I'm very into them. One of the things that happens, and this is not a secret, it's not spoiling anything, but it's basically about this guy, Paul, whose family is hard done by. He's royalty in charge of a planet. And his father gets killed and all kinds of bad stuff happens. And he basically gets an army together to go sort things out, right? That's sort of the story. But he has prescience, which is, there's a lot of people that have prescience. They can foresee the future. And one of the things that Paul is tormented by is that he sees the future of humanity, and it's a jihad with billions dying. And he doesn't know how to stop it. And at one point in the movie, again, this is not really a spoiler, it's like, very much part of the show. He's having visions, and he's like, and they're all doing it in my name, and he doesn't know how to stop it. And he realizes, like, even if he killed himself, that wouldn't stop it. Like, it would actually accelerate, and, he would be a martyr, and it would go on, and later books sort of deal with that in a very... You see sort of how things play out, and it's really interesting. It's a very different kind of story, and it doesn't turn out the way that you think it would. That's all I can say about that. Herbert was very philosophical.
Ahead of his time in a lot of ways.
Well, what's really fun about it is in contrast to Star Trek, which is that, Star Trek tends to rely a lot on technology, and if you basically describe the Federation, it's sort of a technocratic empire in a lot of ways. Like it assimilates it truly, the Federation assimilates, I think that's why the Borg are such a great foil for them, is the Federation assimilates a lot of cultures, right? And sort of brings them into this sort of way of thinking about the world, right? And you have to subscribe to Federation beliefs, right? We're all better together, and it's all good stuff. But you and so there's a lot of technocracy in the Federation.
That's accurate, yeah.
And you compare it to the Dune universe, where there is not. it is, in fact, they have a lot of rules where technology is suppressed. And it's not a... and this is all in the pre-story. This isn't even like, the Dune story begins after all this has happened. And it's because there was actually a religious war against technology. And humans who were pro-technology were all wiped out. And so, like one of the most advanced forms of automatic technology is basically stuff that we would consider trivial. Like, they don't have computers, they don't have a lot of technology. And a lot of the things they do have are like very basic. And so but it's not about that even, so they like, and sometimes we get people who have seen the movie, and then they come into like these forums where I hang out, and they're like, how does this technology work? And they're like, there is no answers to that in the books at all. Herbert just says there's this thing called the Holtzman effect, and that's what it does. And that's it. Like, how do they travel in space? The Holtzman effect. And then they just go on to the next thing. Like, there's no, explanation of like, well, then we build a galactic tunnel, and, there's nothing, and people are just like, what? Like, it's not explained in the books? Nope. That ain't these books, He wants to talk about philosophy. He doesn't want to talk about that. If you want that, you need to read Asimov. Asimov has a lot of that. Heinlein has some of that.
I'm actually reading Asimov right now. Whole bunch. I've finished the robot trilogy. Right now, I just read the Prelude to Foundation. I'm about to read the first book of Foundation, and he's very, very techno savvy.
Yeah,
and it's
like he really loves to explain like the intricate details of some of this stuff. And it's like his favorite character is like the very, very technically proficient engineer who solves problems.
Yes. Yeah,
like
either that or a robot.
Yeah, that or a robot. But like that engineer guy, like he puts him in every book.
Yeah, he's the hero. Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, so if you don't want to read about, technology guys using engineering to solve problems, Asimov is not for you.
This brings up a question I thought you might be a good one to answer, because I've been curious about this. The Federation is always portrayed as this kind of socialist utopia, and they don't use currency anymore. And I haven't watched a whole lot of the original series, but was that ever established in the original series, or did that come later? Because all the original series that I remember seeing, currency just never really came up, because the story is it's a naval vessel basically out exploring, and the adventure that happens is always just encountering these other cultures. The finances of Federation citizens never actually came up, at least not in the ones I saw. So I was always curious, and maybe you could answer that, if that came later, or was that always the case?
Sure. Well, I have a theory on this, okay, and I have a particular point of view, which I will say, and I don't know how widely it's shared. In fact, I don't think it's widely shared at all, but my point of view on Star Trek, and I've talked about this on the show before, so I apologize to my listeners, but I always I often fail, but I try to watch the show as it is in the four corners of the screen. Meaning that I pay a lot less attention to what Gene Roddenberry said the show was about, or like how Brandon Braga would explain what an episode was, or like what something was intended to be, or how something works. If it's not in the episode, like I give it a lot less attention. And I think that a lot of fans have taken a lot of stuff into themselves that like Gene said, or, somebody else said, and sort of watch Star Trek through the lens of what the creators said about it. Now, when you actually watch the show and just stick to the four corners of the screen, it's a very different point of view than you may get if you sort of follow the wider corpus of things that have been written about Star Trek. So I'll give you a specific example, which is that oftentimes they will tell you religion doesn't exist, but yet we've seen praying on the show.
Yeah.
Balance of Terror begins with Angela Martin, DeMartine, I forget her last name right now. Like, she kneels and prays in the episode. You can't tell me that doesn't exist, right? It's in the show. So if you make an assertion that like everyone is an atheist in the Federation, it's very hard to reconcile that with what you're looking at on screen. So that's just a little example of kind of my point of view on how I look at Star Trek. So when you know that, and then you watch the episodes, you realize that there's actually very, very little you see of Federation society, especially in TOS. outside of this military, quote unquote military, quasi-military, paramilitary Navy vessel, to use a term. So you don't really know that much. And now I'm going to violate my own rule and bring in something that was actually in the writer's guide for Star Trek, which is that Gene actually said, we are not going to do a lot of anything to do with Earth. We want to stay away from Earth. We want to stay away from, Federation planets a lot, from people who are actually living in Federation society. This show is going to be about exploring out there. Like, we don't want to be going back that way. We want to be going out that way. And I'm vastly oversimplifying some things. But so this is a long wind up to say that I don't think they actually came up with a coherent theory of how all this stuff works. But you can actually find cases where they talk about some amount of finances or story scenarios where, like, this economy that they talk about of, like, this moneyless economy doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Like why is on Deep Space K7 K7 Cyrano Jones running around trading things? Like, are you telling me that he's just bartering his way to a future? There has to be some sort of monetary system. At one point in one of the episodes, Kirk actually says to Mr. Spock, do you know how much money Starfleet invested in your training? Or he says something like that. May not have the quote exactly right, but Spock was about to give an answer. And then Kirk says, never mind, or, not now, Spock, but he was about to give an answer. And, you can just sort of play the tape out and you think he was going to give a number.
Yeah.
He was going to give a number. And I can't imagine how that works. And especially if you look at the later shows, especially Picard, they've given us a lot more of what Federation society is like. Now, again, it's the 24th century version of that. But if you look at the Picard show, there's an awful lot of Federation society that doesn't look that great in a lot of cases. To this, it's this utopian ideal. I mean, just, let's talk about something that you've seen. So you've seen some of Picard, right? If I recall, right? You saw the first couple seasons?
The first one.
Right. So you saw Raffi living in a trailer in the middle of the desert.
Yeah.
Right? Addicted to some kind of substance.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
I don't know. I what does that tell us about Federation society and how people are living? So I don't know. I just have talked far too long. So let me just pause there, and you can go ahead and react to that or call me to account on any of that if you wish.
Oh, no, it's just something I've been curious about because it's sort of become this sort of accepted notion that the Federation is this socialist utopia, which, and I'm not going to argue the merits of any sort of form of economy here, but I've just, when I've gone back, I was like, when did that, I felt like that was something that evolved, but I felt like it evolved later. Because the only mention I remember of Kirk suggesting no money was, I think, the Star Trek IV, the one with the whales, where they go out and they have pizza and
with the buses and getting on the bus with the money and selling the glasses.
Yeah, but that could almost still just be like, well, inflation was different there, so I could roll with that. But then he out and out says, when she says, "Don't you have money where you come from?" and he just throws his arms up, "Well, we don't." It's like, oh, okay. It's one of those. It's sort of kind of evolved into where it is now, and I've always wondered, like, where did that really come into play? That just how it evolved over time through storytelling, because that's how it works. When something's been around for 60 plus years, like, you just start adding little notions here and there. People build on it. Then it sort of becomes the Bible, even though it really wasn't in the Bible.
Exactly.
It's the fun of storytelling. As a storyteller, the backstory of how the story happens fascinates me.
I would say that, Star Trek never gave that as a promise that the world was going to be incredibly consistent and was going to have a well thought out history behind it. I mean, if you look at, the Game of Thrones books, A Song of Ice and Fire, George R.R. Martin, he thought incredibly deeply and had all kinds of backstory for that. I don't know if you read those books or saw Game of Thrones when it was on TV.
I saw it on TV.
But the books, have incredible depth, and the world is very well thought out. And he knows where everybody is and how far things are and how the economy works and how money works and who has it and who doesn't and what medicine is like. And I mean, he created and crafted all of this stuff. And it's not to say that he didn't make a mistake here and there. He did. But you can see that he did his homework, and there is like an incredibly well thought out stuff. Roddenberry was not interested in that, and neither was Gene Coon, Dorothy Fontana, or the rest of them. They were interested in about telling these kinds of stories for TV. And especially at the time, getting wrapped up in the world building was just not something that was on the radar.
Yeah, no kidding. I think he was just, this is my job for today. I'm going to make this show, and then I'm going to do something else. I don't think he ever expected it to become what it became.
Yeah, and, this is the most heretical part, which is if you look at some of the parts of Star Trek that fans hold themselves to the closest, and that are nearest and dearest to our hearts, a lot of that stuff didn't come from Gene Roddenberry.
Oh, yeah.
the Klingons were invented by Gene Coon. All the Vulcan stuff was Dorothy Fontana, and there's just a lot of that as you go. I mean, you mentioned Star Trek 2. Gene Roddenberry said Star Trek 2 is not Star Trek. Like, there's memos we have of him railing against how bad it was and how he was totally opposed, and he wanted, and all the other things where he was not involved in, he wrote about how terrible they were and how not Star Trek they were. And so if you want to have some kind of purist version of Star Trek, you're going to have a bad time.
Oh, yeah, no kidding. Yeah.
You're going to have a really bad time because you have to go through and try to deconstruct, what Roddenberry's vision was, right? And it's very, very limited compared to what we have today. It's a fool's errand, in my opinion, and I don't think it's actually worth the time. But I will say that there are people out there who valiantly try.
Yeah, I think when it comes to Roddenberry's Trek versus what we have today, my one criticism of Roddenberry's vision of the Federation was it was almost too perfect. It's almost like he envisioned that we would one day reach a point that we wouldn't have problems. And so that's why all the problems on these other worlds that we go out and we help and we solve them. Whereas like the later Trek came in and said, yeah, you know what? We might solve the problems we have today, but we're just going to have new ones. And, but you can still do that with an optimistic perspective on things. And that's kind of my takeaway from like how Trek has evolved over the years. Like, there's still going to be bad, but no matter how utopian we ever maybe even come close to getting, there's still going to be some issues. But anyway, that was a deep dive into something that's I've been curious about for a while. I don't have anybody to talk about it with, so I had to take advantage.
That's okay. That's okay. We totally diverted. And I feel bad for my listeners because I think they've heard all this from me before. So I will probably have to put all that in the bonus content and let people skip it if they want. Because you haven't heard this, but I've talked about my harebrained theories on Star Trek before. So, but I need to know more about your podcast. So, is this? Give me an example of one of the stories you were talking about. Something that only a small town journalist would find.
Okay, one of mine, my favorite one that I've told this so many times. It's a town of 10,000 people, and so the community is very agricultural, and the newspaper office was right there on the town square. And I just remember one time I looked up from my desk and I saw running across the road right by our office was this cow, like all by itself, just got loose running down the road. And then about 4 seconds later, I saw about 4 different vets running after this cow on foot, and they're in scrubs chasing after this cow. And then about 4 more seconds after that, 3 or 4 cops chasing after the vets, also on foot. And my editor sat behind me, so I turned around and looked at him and just said, I got to go take a picture of that, don't I? He said, yep, and you better get moving because they're moving pretty fast.
So you have the cow, the large animal veterinarians, and the police.
Yeah, that's one of my stories. So what I do is I get journalists who, all small town journalists that I've come to know throughout the years when I was doing that job, just to come on and just tell their own stories, tell their fun, silly stories. And part of the reason behind it, in addition to, I think they've got fun stories to tell, is, I mentioned kind of, again, not getting too political, I think journalists have been a little bit unfairly maligned over the years. And I just wanted to show people that, especially with small towns, I can't speak for like CNN or Fox News, but your average reporter working in a little community, I mean, they're not in a high tower. Most of them making the same kind of salary you are, and they're just informing you about what's going on in the town around you. And just, I thought that the best way to tell people that would be not for me to just insist it, but just let them tell their stories.
You got to tell me what's going on with the cow, though. You didn't finish the story.
Well, I ultimately found out the cow was in to be castrated, and so it was hard not to root for the cow, but they caught it.
That's a bull, not a cow, right?
You're right. That would be a bull. So yeah,
okay.
It was a young bull was taken in to be castrated,
and he was not having it. Well, I don't blame him.
No. Like I said, it was hard not to root for him when I found that out. But yeah, they actually cornered it, and I was there to see it when they actually shot it with the tranquilizer. But we did not take a picture of that part.
Oh goodness.
Yeah, I just took a picture of it running down the road. That was enough.
I think she liked Galaxy Quest because it just had a lot of comedy and it was very light on on the sci-fi stuff, and it was more, it was a lighter bite. And I think she enjoyed that. Like if I showed her Star Trek 2, she'd be like, "Oh my god, just Ricardo Montalban, rich Corinthian leather. I don't think I can have any of this," And that's a deep cut that only people of a certain age would get.
Oh, well, I love 2. 2's almost like a horror movie in some scenes where they go on the base on that the
regular one.
Regular one, thank you. Yeah, the where they find the bodies and everything, and just that whole layout reminded me of like an old sci-fi horror film from the 80s. So it's
oh yeah, and
there's a lot to love in that movie.
There's I don't know if you ever read the novelization, which is excellent, but if you read the novelization, there's actually a whole bunch of stuff that actually takes place on Regular One when Khan is there, which you don't get in the movie.
Okay.
So they spend a lot more time. There's a whole section with more on the scientists on the station, and actually when Khan arrives and sort of what he does to them.
Oh.
And yeah. Because some of them escape, but some of them don't.
Yeah.
And so the ones who were left behind, right? They, that's horror.
Yeah.
Let's just put it that way. That's horror. And I'll just leave that there. I shan't spoil it. But the person they had who did the novelization, Vonda McIntyre, who recently passed away, was just great. And so I highly recommend those.